server room smelled like burnt copper and sheer desperation. Gabriel Costa's million-dollar tech team was sweating through their imported silk shirts, staring dead-eyed at a frozen terminal. It held $40 million of syndicate money hostage. They had exactly 12 minutes before the Russians arrived to collect it in cash or in blood. Then a yellow mop bucket rattled against the glass door. Nora sighed, adjusted her faded apron, and stepped into the room. Gabriel Costa didn't pace. Pacing was for men who lacked control, men who let their nerves dictate their physical movements. He stood perfectly still by the frosted glass wall of the server room, a heavy crystal tumbler of bourbon forgotten in his right hand. The ambient freezing hum of the mainframe usually grounded him. Tonight it sounded like a countdown. Simon, the lead systems architect, Gabriel, paid $250,000 a year, was trembling. The tremor started in his hands and worked its way up to his shoulders, visible even through the tailored fabric of his blazer. He hammered the mechanical keyboard, the sharp clatter echoing aggressively against the soundproof walls. Nothing changed. The main monitor suspended above them remained locked in a glaring, hostile red screen. "Talk to me, Simon," Gabriel said. His voice was quiet. It didn't need volume to carry a threat. Simon swallowed hard. "It's a recursive lock, Mr. Costa. The decryption key triggered a secondary firewall we didn't see in the initial sweep. It's bouncing the transfer protocols back into a closed loop. Every time I try to force the packet through, it resets the encryption. Translate. The 40 million is stuck. I can't move it to the offshore accounts." Simon finally looked up his face, a sickly pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. "And if I cut the power, the failsafe triggers and wipes the drive entirely. The money disappears." Gabriel checked his watch. The dial was sleek, unbranded, and devastatingly accurate. 11:42. Grigori and his muscle were expected at midnight. Grigori was not a man who understood recursive locks. He understood briefcases, wire transfers, and broken kneecaps. "Fix it," Gabriel said. "I need time. I need to write a bypass script from scratch. It could take... You have 18 minutes. Across the hall, oblivious to the high-stakes panic radiating from the glass box, Nora pushed her heavy yellow cleaning cart. The wheels squeaked. They always squeaked. She had put in a maintenance request for a new cart 3 months ago, but the invisible hierarchy of the Costa Logistics Company dictated that the night shift cleaners were somewhere at the absolute bottom of the food chain, just beneath the office ficus plants. Nora paused to rub her lower back. It ached with a dull, familiar throb. She was 28, carrying an extra 40 pounds she couldn't seem to shake, since her metabolism slowed in her early 20s, and wearing a grey uniform dress that was about as flattering as a potato sack. Her feet, encased in cheap orthopedics, felt like lead blocks. She was exhausted. It was a bone-deep, soul-sucking exhaustion that came from working 2 jobs just to keep the heat on in a cramped apartment she barely saw. She grabbed her microfiber cloth and the blue glass spray. The server room was the last stop on her floor. She hated the server room. It was always too cold, and the men inside usually looked right through her as if she were part of the drywall. She pushed the heavy door open. The squeak of her cart cut through the tense silence like a gunshot. 4 men in suits snapped their heads toward her. Gabriel turned slowly. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, narrowed. "What are you doing in here?" Simon snapped, his voice cracking with stress. "Trash and glass," Nora said simply. She didn't flinch. When you spent your life being yelled at by angry men in nice suits, you learned to tune out the pitch and focus on the task. She reached for the small wastebasket beside Simon's desk. "Get out. We're in the middle of a critical—" "Let her work," Gabriel interrupted. His voice was flat. "Maybe the smell of lemon spray will mask the stench of your failure, Simon." Simon flushed crimson and turned back to his screen, his fingers flying clumsily across the keys. The red screen flashed again. "Access denied. Recursive loop 0x44A. Nora sprayed the glass partition, wiping it down in broad, methodical circles. She didn't care about their stress. She just wanted to finish her shift and eat a hot meal. But as she moved closer to the central console to grab the second wastebasket, her eyes caught the cascading lines of code on Simon's secondary monitor. She stopped. The cloth hung limp in her hand. It was a mess. A sprawling, bloated mess of C++ and Python scripts mashed together by someone who thought throwing more lines at a problem made them smarter. She squinted. The red block on the main screen wasn't the real problem. It was a decoy. "You're feeding it the wrong syntax," Nora muttered. She hadn't meant to say it out loud. It just slipped out. The frantic clicking stopped. Simon froze, then turned his chair around slowly. He looked her up and down, the frizzy brown hair pulled into a messy bun, the stained grey dress, the chunky white sneakers. "Excuse me," Simon sneered. "Did the cleaning lady just try to give me IT advice?" Nora bit the inside of her cheek. She should walk away, just grab the trash and leave. But she hated seeing bad code. It physically annoyed her. It was like looking at a crooked painting on a wall. "The recursive lock is a phantom," Nora said, her voice quiet but steady. "It's bouncing because you're using a standard brute force injection on a legacy system. Look at the architecture. It's old, really old. If you keep hitting it with that script, you're going to trigger the localized wipe." Gabriel took a slow step forward. He didn't mock her. He didn't yell. He just looked at her with a terrifying, piercing intensity. "And how would you know that—" "Because I have eyes," Nora said suddenly, feeling very defensive. She gripped the handle of her cart. "Just— Never mind. I'll get the trash tomorrow." "Wait," Gabriel said. The single word cracked like a whip in the cold room. "If he's doing it wrong, how do you fix it?" "I wouldn't," Nora said, stepping back toward the door. "I'd just bypass the graphical interface entirely and kill the memory leak causing the loop." Simon laughed, a harsh, panicked sound. "She's reciting buzzwords she heard in a movie, Mr. Costa. Don't listen to her. I need to focus." Gabriel ignored Simon. He kept his eyes locked on Nora. She looked tired, unremarkable, soft around the edges. There was absolutely nothing about her that suggested she knew how to dismantle a cartel-grade encryption firewall. "Show me," Gabriel said. Nora stared at him. "I'm not supposed to touch the computers. It's in my contract. Your contract is with me. I'm telling you to touch the computer." Gabriel looked at his watch. "You have 12 minutes. If you can fix this, I will pay you $10,000 right now." Nora's breath hitched. $10,000. That was rent for the year. That was her mother's medical debt. That was a chance to finally breathe. She let go of the cleaning cart. Nora wiped her sweaty palms on the coarse fabric of her apron. She walked toward the central console. Simon stood up immediately, blocking her path. He was taller than her, smelling heavily of stale espresso and expensive cologne. "You cannot be serious," Simon said, looking past her to Gabriel. "You're going to let the maid touch the mainframe. She's going to wipe the drive. If she hits the wrong keystroke—" "Move, Simon," Gabriel said. "Sir, I strongly advise—" Gabriel didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into his suit jacket, letting his hand rest naturally on the leather shoulder holster concealed beneath the fabric. "I said move." Simon went pale, stepping aside instantly. Nora slid into the ergonomic leather chair. It was warm from Simon's nervous sweat. She grimaced, adjusted the height lever, and pulled herself close to the desk. The keyboard felt different under her fingertips, heavy, mechanical, precise. It had been 4 years since she had touched hardware like this. 4 years since the burnout, the breakdown, and the absolute collapse of her old life. She had traded servers for mop buckets because floors didn't demand your soul. They just demanded bleach. She stared at the dual monitors. The left screen was flashing the red access denied error. The right screen was filled with Simon's chaotic, frantic bypass scripts. "He's right about one thing," Nora said, her eyes scanning the code faster than the men behind her could track. "If I make a mistake, the drive wipes. The money is gone." "Can you do it?" Gabriel asked. He was standing right behind her now. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the faint scent of sandalwood and danger. "Yes," Nora said. She didn't hesitate. It wasn't arrogance. It was a simple statement of fact. Her hands hovered over the keys for a fraction of a second. Then she moved. It wasn't the frantic, panicked hammering Simon had been doing. Nora's typing was a rhythm, a steady, fluid cascade of keystrokes that sounded like rain against glass. She didn't look at the keys. She didn't even look at the red warning screen. She brought up a bare command terminal, a black box with blinking white text. "What is she doing?" one of the junior techs whispered. "She's ignoring the firewall." "She's going through the basement," Simon muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. Nora was manually navigating the kernel of the operating system. She recognized the architecture. It was an archaic banking system protocol layered with modern encryption. Simon had been trying to pick the lock on the front door. Nora was simply unscrewing the hinges from the back. Drop the GUI, she thought. Kill the visual feedback. She typed a string of commands, isolating the memory leak that was feeding the recursive loop. The system was basically having a panic attack, spinning in circles, because of a missing semicolon in the original decryption key. "The firewall is tied to the system clock," Nora said aloud, more to herself than to them. "Every time it hits a millisecond milestone, it resets the lock. You don't break the lock, you just stop time." She suspended the system's internal clock. The red flashing on the left monitor froze mid-pulse. Silence descended on the room. The only sound was the steady breathing of the men behind her and the rhythmic clack of her keys. Nora felt the familiar rush, the tight electric hum in her chest. She had hated this feeling once, the all-consuming obsession of the code, but right now it felt like waking up from a long, dull sleep. She isolated the firewall script, bypassed the validation check, and rerouted the packet transfer through a dummy port she spun up in 3 seconds. "Executing transfer," Nora murmured. She hit enter. The command terminal flashed a string of zeros. For 2 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Simon let out a shaky breath, preparing to say, "I told you so." Then the red screen vanished. It was replaced by a smooth, calming green. A progress bar appeared in the center of the monitor. "Transferring funds. 25%. 60%. 100%. Transfer complete. $40 million secured." Nora pushed the chair back and stood up. She felt a sudden wave of dizziness, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She wiped her hands on her apron again, suddenly acutely aware of how she looked, how dirty her fingernails were, how her hair was falling out of its messy knot. Simon stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. The junior techs were dead silent. Gabriel looked from the green screen to Nora. The cold, impenetrable mask he wore had slipped. For the first time all night, he looked genuinely stunned. He looked at her not as a fixture in the room, not as an invisible laborer, but as an anomaly he couldn't immediately categorize. 9 minutes, Gabriel said softly. It took you exactly 3 minutes to do what my entire department couldn't do in 3 hours. Nora looked down at her orthopedic shoes. It was just a legacy flaw. Anyone who worked on systems before 2015 would have spotted it. Your guys are just too used to modern patches. She walked back over to her yellow cart and grabbed the handle. Wait, Gabriel said. I have to finish the 4th floor before 1 a.m. or my supervisor docks my pay. Nora said, her voice flat. The high was gone. The reality of the mop and the bleach was setting back in. I said I'd pay you $10,000, Gabriel said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black money clip. He didn't count it. He just handed her a thick fold of $100 bills. Nora hesitated. She looked at the money, then at Gabriel. His eyes were dark, intense, and searching. It made her uncomfortable. She reached out and took the cash, stuffing it awkwardly into the deep pocket of her apron. Thank you, she muttered. What's your name? Nora. Who are you, Nora? Gabriel asked, stepping closer. Because a cleaning lady doesn't suspend a kernel clock to bypass a syndicate-grade firewall. I'm just a cleaning lady, Nora said, pushing the cart toward the door. But I used to read a lot. She walked out of the glass room, the wheels of her cart squeaking down the linoleum hallway. Gabriel Costa stood in the doorway watching her go. He didn't look at Simon. He didn't look at the $40 million now safely resting in his offshore accounts. He looked at the small, chubby woman in the grey dress disappearing around the corner, and he realized he was going to turn her life upside down. The N4 night bus smelled like wet wool and stale beer. Nora pressed her forehead against the vibrating window, watching the neon signs of the city blur into smeared lines of color in the rain. Her right hand remained jammed deep inside her coat pocket. Her fingers were curled tight around the thick, unfamiliar wad of $100 bills. $10,000. It was enough to clear her mother's back-due physical therapy bills. It was enough to fix the timing belt on her rusted Honda Civic, so she wouldn't have to take the N4 bus anymore. It was enough to buy groceries that didn't come out of a tin can. But as the bus hit a pothole, sending a jolt up her aching spine, Nora felt zero relief. She only felt a creeping, icy dread. You didn't take $10,000 from Gabriel Costa and just walk away. She knew who he was. Everyone in the building knew who he was, even if the corporate directory listed him as the CEO of a global logistics and shipping conglomerate. Logistics was a polite word for moving things that government agencies preferred, didn't move. She had spent 2 years keeping her head down, avoiding eye contact, and scrubbing the toilets on the executive floor. Tonight she had shown her hand. She had touched the nerve center of his operation. She got off at her stop, a crumbling sidewalk in a neighborhood where the streetlights were mostly decorative. She unlocked her apartment door, stepping over a pile of past-due notices. The apartment was cramped, smelling faintly of mildew and cheap coffee. She locked the deadbolt through her heavy coat on a rickety kitchen chair and dumped the cash on the scarred Formica table. It looked obscene sitting there, next to a half-empty bottle of generic dish soap. Nora sat down heavily. She pulled off her orthopedic shoes, wincing as her swollen feet hit the cold linoleum. She had promised herself 4 years ago that she would never touch a command line again. When her former employer, a cutthroat fintech firm, had used her credentials to mask a massive offshore embezzlement scheme, they hadn't just fired her, they had destroyed her. She avoided prison only because she couldn't afford a lawyer good enough to drag out the trial. pleading down to a misdemeanor that left her permanently blacklisted from the tech industry. The burnout had broken her spirit. The depression had packed on the weight. She looked at her hands. They were calloused from wringing out mops. Tonight, for 3 minutes, they had remembered how to build empires. Across the city, Gabriel Costa was not looking at cash. He was looking at a screen. His penthouse office was a study in aggressive minimalism. Slate floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, and a desk carved from a single slab of reclaimed mahogany. He stood by the glass, nursing a fresh glass of bourbon. "Her name is Nora Gallagher," a voice said from the shadows. Leo stepped into the dim light of the office. He was Gabriel's chief of security, a man built like a heavy-duty safe and possessed of a frighteningly quiet demeanor. He dropped a thin manila folder onto the mahogany desk. "She's 28, lives in the South End, works for the contracted cleaning company we use for the lower floors, but she usually picks up extra shifts on our level when someone calls out sick." Gabriel didn't turn around. "And before she was scrubbing my floors." "That's where it gets interesting," Leo said, flipping the folder open. She was a senior systems architect at Praxis Capital. 4 years ago, $3 million went missing. The audit trail led straight to her terminal. "Did she take it?" Gabriel asked. "No," Leo said bluntly. "I pulled the sealed court records. It was a sloppy frame job by her department head, but she didn't have the resources to fight it. She took a plea, lost her license, lost her savings. She's been invisible ever since. She works 2 cleaning jobs and takes care of an ailing mother." Gabriel finally turned away from the window. He walked over to the desk and stared at the grainy ID photo stapled to the file. It was an older picture. Her face was thinner, her eyes bright and sharp, lacking the dull, heavy exhaustion he had seen in the server room tonight. "Simon is gone," Gabriel said quietly. "I handled it. He's on a plane to Seattle. He knows if he comes back to this coast, he won't need his legs anymore." Leo paused, shifting his weight. "We need a new lead architect, Gabriel. Grigori was furious about the delay tonight. If the network hiccups again during the maritime shipments next week, the Russians will assume we're skimming." Gabriel picked up the folder. He ran his thumb over the edge of the paper. "We don't need a new architect, Leo. We already have one." "Boss," Leo warned, his tone low. "She's a civilian. She's a cleaner. She has a record, sure, but she's not in the life. You bring her into this, you're putting a target on her back." "She put a target on her own back the second she touched that keyboard," Gabriel countered. His voice was absolute. "She bypassed a military-grade firewall in 3 minutes without breaking a sweat. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She just solved the problem and asked to go back to her mop." Gabriel closed the folder. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "Bring her to me tomorrow. Cancel her shift with the cleaning company." "She's not going to like it," Leo noted. "I'm not paying her to like it," Gabriel said. "I'm paying her to keep my money alive." Nora didn't get to her shift the next evening. She was standing at the bus stop in the freezing drizzle, her hands shoved into her pockets, when a black SUV pulled smoothly up to the curb. It didn't splash through the puddles. It glided over them. The rear window rolled down with a soft electronic hum. Leo was sitting in the back. He looked completely out of place in her run-down neighborhood, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than her car. "Get in, Miss Gallagher," Leo said. Nora stared at him. Her heart gave a violent, panicked thump against her ribs. She looked up and down the empty street. Running was out of the question. She couldn't outrun a heavy-set security guy on a good day, let alone in the rain wearing cheap sneakers. She swallowed the lump in her throat, opened the heavy door and slid onto the pristine leather seats. The car smelled like new car wax and expensive leather. It was jarringly warm. "Am I in trouble?" Nora asked, staring straight ahead at the driver's headrest. "Mr. Costa wants a word," was all Leo said. The drive was silent. Nora felt her stomach twist into a tight, agonizing knot. She mentally calculated how fast she could transfer the $10,000 to her mother's account before they killed her. It was a bleak, cynical thought, but it kept her grounded. They didn't take her to the loading docks or a dark warehouse. They pulled into the underground executive garage of the Costa Tower. Leo escorted her up a private elevator that bypassed the main floors, entirely spitting them out into the penthouse suite. Nora felt violently out of place. Her faded grey coat was damp, her hair was frizzy from the humidity, and she was acutely aware of how much space she took up in the sleek, minimalist hallway. Leo opened a heavy oak door and nodded for her to enter. Gabriel Costa was sitting behind his desk. In the daylight, he looked even more intimidating. He wasn't conventionally handsome. His features were too sharp, too predatory, but he possessed a raw, undeniable gravity. He commanded the room without moving a muscle. "Sit," Gabriel said. Nora didn't sit. She stood awkwardly near the door. "I'm supposed to be on the 4th floor. My supervisor—" "Your supervisor was informed you've been reassigned," Gabriel interrupted. He gestured to the empty leather chair opposite him. "Sit down, Nora." She slowly crossed the room and sat. The chair was incredibly comfortable, which somehow made the situation worse. Gabriel pushed a thick tablet across the mahogany desk toward her. "Take a look." Nora hesitated, then reached out. The screen displayed a massive network topology map. It was a chaotic web of encrypted nodes, server farms, and offshore data centers. It was a digital fortress, but to her eyes, it looked like a crumbling castle wall held together by duct tape. "This is my network," Gabriel said, watching her face intently. "Simon built it. He told me it was impenetrable." "Simon is an idiot," Nora said. The words slipped out before she could filter them. Gabriel's mouth twitched. It was the ghost of a smile. "I agree. That's why Simon is currently enjoying an early retirement. I need someone to rebuild it, from the ground up." Nora pushed the tablet back. "I'm a cleaner, Mr. Costa." "You were a senior architect at Praxis Capital," Gabriel corrected smoothly. "You designed the routing algorithms they still use today to hide their tax evasion. You were framed, fired, and forgotten." Nora's blood ran cold. The air in her lungs seized. She gripped the armrests of the chair, her knuckles turning white. "You looked into me." "I look into anyone who touches my money," Gabriel said. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "You're hiding, Nora. You're punishing yourself for a mistake you didn't even make. You're scrubbing floors because it's safe. It requires nothing from you. It pays the rent," she snapped, finding a sudden flash of anger beneath her fear. "And it doesn't end with me being interrogated by men with guns. I did you a favor last night. I fixed your glitch. I kept your money. Let me go back to my mop." "I can't do that," Gabriel said softly. "Why not?" "Because Grigori knows." Nora froze. "Who is Grigori?" "He's the man who was coming to collect that $40 million last night." Gabriel explained, his voice losing its corporate polish, revealing the cold steel underneath. "He's Russian syndicate. He has his own tech people. They noticed the anomaly in the transfer. They noticed the localized time stop. They know Simon doesn't have the brain power to execute a kernel bypass like that." Gabriel stood up and walked around the desk. He leaned against the edge, towering over her. "Grigori is looking for the ghost who fixed my network. If he finds you before I secure you, he won't offer you a job. He will put you in a basement in Moscow and force you to break into Federal Reserve banks until you die." Nora stared at him, the reality of her situation crashing down on her like a physical weight. The room started to spin slightly. She had just wanted to stop the annoying red flashing screen. She had just wanted the 10 grand. "You're scaring me," she whispered, the cynical armor finally cracking. "Good," Gabriel said. He didn't sound malicious. He sounded dead serious. "Fear keeps you sharp. You work for me now. You get your own office. You get a salary that makes last night's 10,000 look like pocket change. And more importantly, you get my protection. And if I say no," Gabriel looked down at her, "you won't. Because you're tired of being invisible, Nora. I saw your face last night when that code compiled. You've been starving for 4 years. I'm offering you the keys to the kingdom." The transition was jarring, like stepping out of a freezing alleyway into a blindingly bright surgical theater. On Monday morning, Nora did not walk through the service entrance. She came through the main lobby. She wore her best slacks, a black pair from a discount department store that pinched slightly at her waist, and a beige cardigan that did nothing to hide the soft, heavy curves of her body. She felt like an imposter. Her skin itched. Every click of an expensive heel on the Italian marble floor made her want to shrink into the nearest maintenance closet. Leo was waiting for her by the security desk. He didn't smile, but he gave her a curt nod, handing her a sleek black keycard. The plastic was warm. It had a gold star embossed in the corner. "Level 40, Leo said. "Top floor, the glass office at the end of the hall. It used to be Simon's." Nora took the card. "Did you scrub the bad cologne out of the carpet?" Leo's mouth twitched. "I had the furniture burned. You have a new desk." The tech floor was a sprawling, open-plan nightmare of high-end monitors and glass partitions. When Nora stepped out of the elevator, the ambient hum of conversation died. 30 heads turned. These were the junior developers, the system analysts, and the network engineers. Most of them were men in their mid-20s, dressed in expensive streetwear, vibrating with caffeine and arrogance. They recognized her. They had spent the last 2 years ignoring her while she emptied their trash and wiped their spilled coffee off the break room counters. Now she was walking past them, holding a level 40 master keycard. Nora kept her eyes locked on the frosted glass office at the end of the aisle. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Just keep walking. Don't look at them." She pushed the door open. Leo wasn't kidding. The room was entirely refurnished. A massive, curved walnut desk dominated the space, holding 3 ultra-wide monitors. A mechanical keyboard, heavy matte black and terrifyingly expensive, sat perfectly centered on a leather mat. Nora set her canvas tote bag on the floor. She sat in the chair. It was an ergonomic marvel that immediately adjusted to support her aching lower back. She placed her hands on the keyboard. The door clicked open behind her. Nora spun around. It wasn't Gabriel. It was a junior developer named Caleb. He was 24, had a trust fund he liked to brag about loudly in the break room, and possessed a face entirely untouched by real hardship. He was holding a stack of requisition forms, looking at her with a mixture of amusement and outright contempt. "Hey," Caleb said, leaning against the doorframe. "I think there's a misunderstanding. HR said the new chief architect was moving in today. You need to clear out." Nora stared at him. 4 years ago, she would have politely excused herself, terrified of confrontation. 4 days ago, she would have apologized and asked where she should take her mop. But Gabriel Costa had given her the keys to the kingdom. and Nora realized with a sudden cold clarity that she was tired of apologizing for taking up space. "Shut the door, Caleb," Nora said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Caleb blinked. "Excuse me." "You're letting a draft into my office. Shut the door." Caleb laughed, a short barking sound. "Right. Okay. I don't know what kind of stunt Costa is putting the cleaning lady in here, but I need these server requisitions signed by someone who actually knows how to read them." He dropped the heavy stack of papers onto her pristine desk. Nora didn't look at the papers. She turned back to her monitors. She tapped the keyboard, waking the system. Her fingers flew across the mechanical keys, the loud, satisfying clack echoing in the quiet office. She didn't use a mouse. She didn't need to. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked, his smirk faltering slightly as the screens flared to life, cascading with command terminal code. "You're running the Delta node encryption on the secondary servers, right?" Nora asked, not looking away from the screens. "The ones handling the offshore wire obfuscation. Yeah, that's standard protocol." "It's garbage," Nora said. She hit the enter key with her thumb. "You left port 8080 open on your local machine to test a backdoor script you wrote so you could play games on the company network. It's creating a vulnerability in the main firewall." Caleb went pale. "How do you—" "I just revoked your administrative privileges," Nora said, turning her chair to face him. "Your workstation is now locked. You have read-only access to the public intranet. If you want your permissions back, you're going to rewrite the Delta node encryption from scratch, close your back door, and submit it to me for review by 5 p.m. Caleb stared at her, his mouth hanging open. He looked like a fish suffocating on a dock. "You can't do that." "I just did." Nora picked up the stack of requisition forms and dropped them into the wastebasket by her feet. "And next time you come into my office, you knock." Caleb backed out of the room, his face flushed dark red. He practically tripped over his own feet as he pulled the door shut. Nora let out a long, shaky breath. Her hands were trembling slightly. She grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. "Well," a deep voice said from the corner of the room. "That was efficient." Nora gasped, her head snapping to the left. Gabriel was sitting in a low leather armchair in the corner of the office, perfectly camouflaged by the shadows. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, looking entirely too relaxed. He had been there the whole time. "Were you just going to sit there and let him yell at me?" Nora asked, her pulse spiking again. "If you needed me to save you, you wouldn't be the right person for this job," Gabriel said. He stood up, moving with that silent, predatory grace. He walked over to her desk and looked down at the screens. "You handled him. He'll never question you again. And by lunchtime, the rest of the floor will know you gutted him in 60 seconds. "I'm not a killer," Nora muttered, looking down at her hands. Gabriel reached out. His fingers brushed against her knuckles. The contact was brief, shocking, and electric. Nora froze. "You're a survivor, Nora," Gabriel said softly. "In my world, that's exactly the same thing. Now get to work. We have a leak to find." 2 weeks bled into each other. Nora practically lived in the glass cage. She mapped Gabriel's network, pulling it apart, line by line. What she found terrified her. The entire system was a patchwork of arrogance and lazy coding. Simon had built walls that looked impenetrable from the outside, but the foundations were rotten. It was only a matter of time before someone realized they could just walk under the walls. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday. The tech floor was pitch black, completely abandoned, except for the soft, glowing halo of light spilling from Nora's office. She was hunched over the keyboard, her glasses pushed up onto her forehead, rubbing her tired eyes. Her hair was a chaotic nest. She had kicked her shoes off hours ago. She was exhausted, but her brain was wired, buzzing with the frantic energy of the hunt. She had found something. It wasn't a glitch. It was a ghost. The office door clicked open. Nora didn't jump this time. She recognized the heavy, deliberate cadence of his footsteps. Gabriel walked in, holding a brown paper bag. He looked just as exhausted as she felt. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, jagged scars. He set the bag on the edge of her desk. The smell of roasted garlic, hot oil, and seared beef hit the air. "Eat," Gabriel commanded. Nora looked at the bag. "I'm not hungry. You haven't left this chair in 14 hours. Your blood sugar is crashing. You're going to make a mistake." He reached into the bag and pulled out 2 styrofoam containers, popping the lids. It was high-end steakhouse takeout, still steaming. He handed her a plastic fork. "Eat the meat, Nora, or I will have Leo force-feed you." She took the fork. The cynical part of her knew this was just asset maintenance. You don't let your $1 million racehorse starve. But the human part of her, the part that had been lonely for 4 long years, felt a strange, quiet warmth bloom in her chest. She took a bite. It was incredible. She closed her eyes for a brief second, chewing slowly. Gabriel watched her. He pulled up a chair beside her desk, sitting close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. He opened his own container but didn't eat. He just stared at the scrolling code on her center monitor. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice low in the quiet room. Nora swallowed, setting the fork down. She tapped the screen. "Grigori isn't just looking for the ghost who fixed your firewall. He's been inside your house for months." Gabriel went perfectly still. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Explain." Nora brought up a visual map of the network traffic. It looked like a pulsing web of blue lines. But deep in the center, barely visible, was a tiny red thread. "It's a dormant packet sniffer," Nora said. "It's brilliant, actually. It doesn't steal money. Money is loud. Stealing money sets off alarms." "What does it steal?" "Logistics," Nora said, turning to look at him. "Shipment manifests, routing numbers, GPS coordinates for your transport trucks, bribe schedules for the dock workers. Someone planted this script deep in the kernel. Once a week at 3 a.m. on a Sunday, it wakes up, compresses all your physical movement data for the last 7 days, and fires it off to an untraceable server in St. Petersburg." Gabriel stared at the red thread on the monitor. The muscles in his jaw flexed. "Simon." "No." Nora shook her head. Simon was an idiot, but he wasn't a traitor. He didn't have the technical skill to write something this elegant. This is state-level malware. Whoever planted this had physical access to the server room. They plugged a drive directly into the mainframe. Gabriel slowly turned his gaze from the screen to her face. His eyes were completely unreadable. "Who has access to the server room?" "You, Leo, Simon." Nora paused, her throat going dry. "And the night shift cleaning crew." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Nora realized exactly what she had just said. She had just given the Mafia boss, sitting next to her, a perfectly logical reason to suspect her. She had been in that room. She had the access. She had the skill. Panic flared in her chest. "Gabriel, I swear to God, I didn't—" He cut her off his hand, shooting out to grip her wrist. His fingers were hot and calloused. He didn't squeeze hard enough to hurt her, but the grip was absolute. "Breathe, Nora," he said softly. "I didn't plant it." She rushed out her heart, hammering wildly. "I just found it. If I planted it, I wouldn't have shown you. I would have... I know, Gabriel said. He released her wrist, though the ghost of his touch lingered on her skin. I know it wasn't you. How? Gabriel leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his tired face. Because if you were working for Grigori, he wouldn't have sent his men to my warehouse tonight to kill my drivers. Nora's blood ran cold. What? They hit a shipment 3 hours ago. 4 of my men are dead. 2 trucks carrying weapons meant for the port are gone. Gabriel's voice was devoid of emotion, a flat, dead calm that was infinitely more terrifying than anger. They knew exactly where the trucks would be. They knew the radio frequencies my men were using. They knew everything. He looked at the tiny red thread on the screen. Grigori is making his move, Gabriel said. He's using the data this ghost protocol fed him to dismantle me piece by piece. Nora stared at him. The stakes sitting between them suddenly smelled sickening. The sterile safety of her glass office shattered. She wasn't just fixing code anymore. People were dying in the dark. Can you kill it? Gabriel asked, looking her dead in the eyes. Can you cut the red thread? Nora looked back at the monitor. If I cut it, the script sends an automatic alert to St. Petersburg. They'll know we found it. It'll trigger a complete system wipe to destroy the evidence. We lose the entire network. Gabriel leaned in his face, inches from hers. Then what do we do? Nora's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The fear was still there, cold and sharp, but underneath it, the old architect was waking up. The woman who built labyrinths. We don't cut the thread, Nora whispered. We poison it. We feed them fake routing data. We send them exactly where we want them to go. The poison wasn't a virus. It was a lie. Nora didn't try to break the Russian malware. She built a sandbox around it. For the next 36 hours she lived on black coffee-cold takeout and a frantic, thrumming adrenaline that made her teeth ache. She cloned the entire Costa logistics database, every truck route, every shipping manifest, every guard rotation, and then she meticulously began to change the numbers. She couldn't just invent a fake shipment. Grigori's tech team would spot a sudden anomaly. The lie had to be perfect. It had to look exactly like Gabriel's usual operations, right down to the file sizes and the metadata timestamps. Gabriel stayed in the office. He didn't hover, but his presence was a heavy, constant anchor in the room. He sat on the leather sofa, a burner phone pressed to his ear. His voice, a low, gravelly murmur, as he quietly recalled his heavy hitters from out of state. He was preparing for a war, and he was using her code as the battlefield. By Saturday night, the trap was set. Nora slumped back in her chair, rubbing her burning eyes beneath her glasses. The glow of the monitors cast long, harsh shadows across her pale face. "It's done," she rasped. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "I redirected the Tuesday weapons shipment. The real trucks are going to the underground depot in the Bronx. The Ghost Protocol thinks they're going to Pier 44 in Brooklyn." Gabriel ended his call and set the phone on the glass coffee table. He walked over to her desk. He looked at the screen, though he couldn't read the dense blocks of Python and C#. He trusted her. That realization hit Nora with a strange, heavy impact. "Pier 44 is a dead zone," Gabriel said. "Concrete walls, single entry point. We own the harbor master. If Grigori sends his strike team there, they walk into a kill box." Nora looked down at her keyboard. The mechanical keys were smudged with fingerprints. "How many men is he going to send?" "Enough to steal $10 million in automatic rifles," Gabriel replied bluntly. 20. Maybe 30. "And how many are you sending?" 40. Gabriel paused, his dark eyes studying the tight line of her shoulders. You're shaking, Nora. She crossed her arms, digging her fingers into her own biceps. I'm just cold. You're terrified, Gabriel corrected softly. He stepped closer, leaning his hip against the edge of her desk. You built a theoretical puzzle in a vacuum. Now you're realizing that when this code executes, real men are going to bleed on real concrete. You're crossing the line. I crossed the line when I took your 10 grand in the server room, Nora whispered, staring at the floor. No, that was survival. This is participation. Gabriel reached out. His large, warm hand cupped her jaw, forcing her to look up at him. His thumb brushed a smudge of grease from her cheekbone. The touch was agonizingly gentle for a man who had just ordered 40 men to a slaughter. If you want to walk away, I will let you walk out that door right now. I'll put $1 million in your mother's account, and I will erase you from the grid. Grigori will never find you, but you will go back to being a ghost. Nora held his gaze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She thought of the heavy mop bucket. She thought of Caleb's smug face. She thought of the 4 years she had spent apologizing for existing. Then she thought of the code, the elegant, flawless trap she had built. It was hers. I'm staying, Nora said. Her voice didn't shake. Gabriel's eyes darkened. A slow, dangerous smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. He let his hand drop from her face. Sunday at 3 a.m., the script wakes up. Sunday morning arrived with a suffocating tension. The tech floor was completely locked down. Leo stood by the frosted glass door, a silent sentinel with a suppressed pistol holstered visibly at his hip. At 2:58 a.m., Nora brought the main terminal to the front screen. 2 minutes, she said. Gabriel stood right behind her. He didn't speak. The digital clock on the bottom right of the monitor ticked forward. 2:59. Nora felt a bead of sweat roll down her spine. If she had miscalculated the compression algorithm, the payload would fail. Grigori would know they were on to him. 300. The tiny red thread on the network map flared to life. The dormant packet sniffer woke up. Nora's fingers flew across the keys, manually holding the sandbox open. The script blindly reached into the database, grabbing the poisoned files she had laid out like breadcrumbs. Compressing data. Transmitting to external IP. It's taking the bait. Nora breathed, her eyes darting across the scrolling lines of code. The packet is moving. Transmission complete. The red thread went dark. The sniffer went back to sleep. Nora exhaled a breath she felt like she had been holding for 3 days. She slumped forward onto the desk. They have it. They think the guns are going to Pier 44. Gabriel placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. He squeezed once, a rare, visceral show of approval, before turning to Leo. Load up, Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a lethal octave. We go to Brooklyn. Tuesday night smelled like ozone and cheap coffee. Nora sat entirely alone in the glass office. The silence on the tech floor was absolute. Everyone else had been sent home. Gabriel wanted no civilian casualties if Grigori realized the trap and decided to hit the tower instead. A heavy military-grade radio sat on Nora's desk next to her keyboard. It was tuned to the tactical frequency Gabriel's men were using. For the past 2 hours it had broadcast nothing but static and terse, one-word status checks. Perimeter holding. South wall clear. Nora stared at the network monitor. The green lines of Costa's server traffic pulsed steadily. She felt sick. Her stomach was tied into a cold, hard knot. She kept imagining the dark, rain-slicked concrete of Pier 44. She kept imagining the men waiting in the shadows with hollow point ammunition. At 11:45 p.m., the radio crackled. 3 vans approaching the main gate, headlights off. It was Leo's voice, distorted and tight. Nora froze. She stopped breathing. "Let them enter," Gabriel's voice came through the speaker. He sounded entirely calm. It was the same tone he used when asking her to fix a firewall. "Wait until the rear doors open. Nobody leaves the box." 2 agonizing minutes passed. The static hissed. Then the world exploded. The radio shrieked with the deafening staccato roar of automatic gunfire. Nora flinched violently, knocking her coffee cup over. Brown liquid spilled across the desk, dripping onto her lap. But she didn't care. She stared at the black plastic box as if it were a bomb. Men were screaming. It wasn't the clean cinematic violence of movies. It was chaotic, wet, and raw. She heard the heavy thump, thump, thump of a mounted rifle tearing through metal and flesh. "Left flank! Push the left flank!" Leo bellowed over the gunfire. Nora covered her mouth with both hands, tears welling in her eyes. "I did this," she thought. "I typed a command on a keyboard, and now men are dying." Suddenly, her center monitor flashed violently. The screen turned a stark, blinding red. "Warning, unauthorized root access detected." Nora gasped, dropping her hands. She scrambled for the keyboard. Grigori's tech team wasn't stupid. The moment the ambush started at the pier, the Russians realized the data was poisoned. They were sending a kill switch command to the dormant malware. They were trying to wipe Gabriel's entire mainframe as revenge. "No, you don't." Nora snarled, her fear instantly vaporized by a surge of pure defensive fury. "Not in my house." She bypassed the GUI, dropping straight into the command line. The Russian hacker was aggressive, using a brute force memory overflow to crash the firewalls. It was a sledgehammer approach. Nora's fingers became a blur. She didn't try to block the sledgehammer. She opened a dummy port and let the overflow pour into an isolated server cluster she had spun up the day before. Critical error. Memory corruption in Sector 4. "Eat trash," Nora muttered, rerouting the corrupted data right back into the Russian IP address, flooding their own terminal with their garbage code. She severed the external connection and locked the root directory behind a 256-bit encryption key. The red screen vanished, replaced by the steady, calming green of a secure network. She had held the door shut. Nora leaned back, gasping for air. Her hands were shaking violently now. She looked at the radio. The gunfire had stopped. "Gabriel," she whispered into the empty room. The radio hissed. "All targets down. The pier is secure." It was Leo. He sounded exhausted. Nora waited for Gabriel's voice, but it didn't come. For the next hour, she paced the glass office. The adrenaline crush left her nauseous and dizzy. She tried to clean up the spilled coffee, but her hands wouldn't stop trembling. At 1:15 a.m., the heavy doors to the tech floor opened. Nora rushed out of her office. Gabriel walked down the aisle. He was alone. His dark overcoat was torn at the shoulder, and his face was smeared with black grease and dirt. He was holding his left arm tight against his ribs. Blood, dark, wet, and heavy, soaked through the sleeve of his white shirt, dripping a steady rhythm onto the pristine marble floor. "Gabriel." Nora ran to him. He didn't collapse, but he leaned heavily against a cubicle desk as she reached him. His face was deathly pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. "The network?" he asked. His voice was a ragged rasp. "Secure." Nora said, her hands hovering over his bleeding arm, terrified to touch it. "They tried to trigger a wipe. I dumped them into a dead server and locked the ports. It's safe." Gabriel let out a harsh, breathless laugh. Good girl. You're bleeding, she said, her voice cracking. We need to get you to a hospital. No hospitals, he grunted, pushing himself off the desk. Leo has a private doctor waiting in the penthouse. He stopped, swaying slightly. I just needed to see if you held the line. I held it, Nora said fiercely. She stepped under his right arm, wrapping her own arm around his thick waist to support his weight. He was incredibly heavy, but she planted her orthopedics firmly on the floor and took the burden. Gabriel looked down at her. His dark eyes were glassy with pain, but the absolute intensity in them remained unbroken. Grigori is dead, Gabriel whispered. You did it, Nora. You broke the syndicate with a keyboard. We need to move, she insisted, ignoring the horrific reality of what he just said, focusing entirely on keeping him upright. She half-carried, half-dragged him toward the private elevator. The blood stained her cheap cardigan, ruining it entirely. But as the elevator doors closed, sealing them in the quiet metallic box, Nora didn't look away from the blood. She had built the trap. She had held the line. The invisible maid was dead. The architect had finally arrived. The penthouse smelled of rubbing alcohol copper and expensive leather. The underground doctor, a quiet, balding man who asked zero questions, packed his surgical tools into a battered leather bag and left. Leo escorted him to the private elevator, leaving Nora alone with Gabriel in the cavernous living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sprawling, glittering view of the city at 3 a.m. It looked peaceful from up here. It was a massive concrete lie. Gabriel sat on the edge of a charcoal velvet sofa. His ruined shirt was gone. His left shoulder and ribs were bound tightly in thick, immaculate white gauze. He looked entirely drained, the lethal tension in his muscles finally slackening, but his dark eyes tracked Nora as she stepped out of his adjoining bathroom. She had tried to wash the blood off her hands. Her skin was raw from the harsh soap, but the water had only managed to spread the stain across the front of her beige cardigan. It was drying stiff and dark brown against the cheap fabric. She looked down at it, feeling the heavy, undeniable gravity of the night pulling at her bones. Take it off, Gabriel said. His voice was a rough, exhausted rasp. Nora looked up her pulse, giving a tired thud. He gestured with his good arm to a folded black sweatshirt resting on the glass coffee table. It's one of mine. It will be massive on you, but it's clean. Throw the cardigan in the fire. Nora didn't argue. She unbuttoned the ruined sweater, shivering slightly, as the cool air of the penthouse hit her arms and tossed it into the gas fireplace built into the far wall. The fabric caught instantly, curling into black ash. She pulled Gabriel's heavy sweatshirt over her head. It swallowed her frame, entirely falling past her thighs. It smelled like sandalwood and smoke. It felt absurdly safe. Gabriel reached forward with a wince, grabbing a crystal decanter from the table. He poured 2 fingers of amber bourbon into a glass and pushed it across the glass surface toward her. Drink, he commanded softly. Nora walked over and sank into the leather armchair opposite him. She picked up the heavy crystal. She didn't sip it. She threw it back like medicine. The liquor burned a brilliant, fiery path down her throat, settling into a knot of heat in her stomach. She gasped, her eyes watering. Grigori's lieutenants are already tearing each other apart, Gabriel said, leaning back against the sofa cushions. He watched her carefully. His syndicate is fracturing. By tomorrow night, my men will control his shipping routes. We won. You almost died, Nora said bluntly. She set the empty glass down with a sharp clink. They tried to wipe the mainframe. If I had been 2 seconds slower on the port redirect, You would have lost the routing data, the offshore accounts, everything. But you weren't slower, Gabriel countered. You held the door. I don't want to do that again, Nora said. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, burying her face in her hands. The adrenaline was entirely gone, leaving a hollow, echoing exhaustion. I don't want to listen to men dying over a radio. I can't live in that. You won't have to, Gabriel said. The absolute certainty in his voice made her look up. Grigori was a butcher. He forced a ground war. With his network absorbed into ours, no one in this city has the infrastructure to challenge us. You built a fortress tonight, Nora. A real one. He slowly pushed himself up from the sofa. He crossed the short distance between them and knelt on the hardwood floor, right in front of her chair. It was an awkward, painful movement for a man with a bullet crease in his shoulder, but he ignored the grimace pulling at his mouth. He looked up at her. For the first time since she had walked into his server room with a mop bucket, the cold, calculating mob boss was completely gone. The man looking at her was stripped bare, anchored only by the raw respect he held for her. 4 years ago, a bunch of corporate cowards broke you and threw you away. Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate timbre. They made you scrub their floors because they were too stupid to understand what you were capable of building. They made you feel invisible. He reached out. His large, calloused hand rested on her knee. The weight of it was grounding. You are not invisible anymore, Gabriel promised. You are the architect of this empire. From tomorrow on, nobody touches the network without your permission. Nobody questions your code. You name your salary, you name your hours. Your mother's medical debts will vanish by sunrise. You belong here. Nora stared at him. Her chest tightened, aching with a sudden, overwhelming emotion she couldn't name. She had spent years trying to shrink, trying to take up as little space as possible. Gabriel Costa was looking at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. I'm not a killer, she whispered, a final, desperate defense. I have enough killers, Gabriel said softly. His thumb traced a slow, soothing circle against the heavy fabric of the sweatshirt covering her knee. I needed a genius, and I found her. Nora looked at the hand resting on her leg. Then she looked into his dark, unyielding eyes. The fear was finally gone. In its place was something harder, something sharp and cold and brilliant. She reached down and placed her hand over his. I want a new mechanical keyboard, Nora said, her voice steady. And Caleb is fired. Gabriel's mouth curved into a slow, genuine smile. Done. That's the end of Nora's origin story, but it's just the beginning of her reign. From a discarded cleaner scrubbing toilets to the untouchable digital queen of Gabriel Costa's underground empire, Nora proved that real power isn't about the tailored suit you wear. It's about the code you control. And Gabriel finally found the one person he could trust with his life, his money and his legacy. If you loved this dark, high-stakes romance, smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more intense audio stories. What would you do if a mob boss handed you the keys to his empire? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next one.